Another episode of the Square and Compass podcast. Back once again in Texas, a place I've been lucky enough to visit in person a few times and virtually a bunch of times now. With Companion, he's got a lot of different Masonic titles, but today we're going with Companion Jeff Bennett. Thank you so much for being here.
It's great. Thank you, Cameron, for the opportunity.
So,
and by the way, I know who's in Texas. Howdy, or what's up, or que paso, or how's your mom and them, things like that. So yeah, that kind of covers all the different parts of Texas. Western.
There you go. There's a lot.
Huh?
Texas is a big state. You know, people don't realize, I think, how big Texas is. Second largest, right? Alaska is the only one bigger.
Right. As far as land goes, and population, I think we're somewhere number 3 to number 5. Just depends on somewhere behind, usually California, New York, or Florida, somewhere in there.
But yeah, there's a lot of, it's a really, really big state, so I'm not surprised there's a bunch of different greetings. And, you came to my attention through a mutual friend of ours and a really good brother, brother Khadim Lo, who was on the podcast. I'll leave a link to his video, his podcast somewhere here. He was on talking about Masonic travel with his brother, Dion Williams, and then through that, contacted you to discuss the York Masonic York Rites, right? Those Masonic rites, which is, as I was telling you offline, something it's probably the area I am most ignorant about in terms of my Masonic education. I know the basics, or even what I think is the basics. You may disabuse me of some of that, coming from the York region in England. I kind of understand the basics, but I certainly don't have a very, my knowledge is relatively limited on that. So I really appreciated you reaching out, where not just for me, but the audience, we can learn more about what really is one of the, in Freemasonry, right? There's your Blue Lodges, and then there's the Scottish Rite, the York Rite, and the Shriners, right? It's one of the 4 kind of main elements of Freemasonry. I would say. I don't know if you would describe it that way.
Well, I think for your kind of average, typical last 150 years of existence of Freemasonry in the lower 48, for sure. Those 4 groups have been the dominant focus of everyone's efforts, and out of that, we have the different structures, either at the state level with our grand jurisdictions of our Grand Lodges, not having a Grand Lodge of the United States of America, and our chapters and councils. I'll go into that in a minute, how they're structured kind of uniquely and differently. And that's one of the things we've kind of talked about. What draws me back and keeps me going and some of that is the implicit diversity in the chapter and the council work and the jurisdictional structure and things. The Shrine is an international and a local body, and the Scottish Rite is divided up into 2 jurisdictions in the United States: northern jurisdiction and a southern jurisdiction. And that's kind of, and there's some variations on all that also, but I don't want to go too long on that. So that's kind of the quick overview that I would say.
You are, as I mentioned at the start, right? We're coming from Texas, and I was listening to one of your podcast appearances recently. I'm not sure how many podcast appearances you've done altogether, but I was listening to one you did last year, and one thing you mentioned, and I was curious if this still holds true, and if you have any just general thoughts on this. You mentioned that Texas in particular, a lot of the brethren seem to gravitate towards the York Rite in Texas. Would you say that's still the case, or do you have any thoughts as to what it might be about Texas that kind of encourages that way?
And I'm looking at it through kind of a regional and national lens. We have, I think, in the Grand Lodge of Texas, still like 40,000 Blue Lodge Masons, which you walked past a couple thousand of them when you came to our Grand Lodge session. Was that back this last January or the January before? I can't remember.
Oh my gosh, I haven't been to a Grand Lodge communication session in Texas. I really want to go to one. I've been to a few events in Texas I was at. Oh my
Okay.
God, I don't remember. I was at Gonzalez, which was a lot of fun with the then Grandmaster Brad Billings. I've been to a bunch of stuff, but and I've whenever I see an advertisement for something, I try to post it, but I
Right.
never had a chance to actually visit the annual communication.
Well, our auditorium, we still have our original, our kind of our latest Grand Lodge building, and the main auditorium holds, I think, over a few thousand. It has a few thousand theater style seats, an upper balcony, lower floor, and so it's if you were there, what I was saying was, and a guest of Brad, and we could have walked past each other for 3 days and never probably even gotten the opportunity to reach out a hand, because whenever everything's about to start or has just ended, it's a mass of people coming in and out of the building. So uh, not saying that any other way than it's a very large session. And I think I go sometimes and I go, wow. And I look back on Facebook and I go, wow, that guy was there. I didn't even see him at all in person. There's a lot of things going on that week. Um, so go ahead. I'm sorry.
All right, no, well, let's start with the basics then. We kind of jumped ahead a bit. Let's start with yourself. So tell me a bit about your history in Freemasonry, specific to, obviously, as with everything, right? You're starting at the Blue Lodge level or Craft Lodge levels, is, pick your term, and then you're going to be moving on to the rites. So tell me a bit about your Masonic history, how you first became involved in Masonry, and then what compelled you to seek out the rites and the York Rite in particular.
For me, it probably started the day I was born. My papa is a very active Freemason. He was master of his lodge in 1955 in a rural town in East Texas. My uncle, who's still with us, he's a very active Freemason, has always been. And I just remember growing up and couple little things. Papa was very involved in Shriners and riding like many dirt bikes and doing figure eights in the street for parades and supporting the circus in that area out of his shrine, and just always selling raffle tickets and always promoting Freemasonry, wearing a Scottish Rite, 32nd degree double eagle ring. Um, I remember uh, Christmas Eve. My grandparents would have us over the house, and myself and my cousin, my sister would unwrap presents, and Santa Claus would bring them to us. And he was one of my Papa's Shriner Scottish Rite buddies, and he would wear also. I always thought that Santa Claus was a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason because I saw his ring for about 10 years on Christmas Eve. And my uncle just, it was always something that was out there, not really talked about a lot, but was really supported on my mom's side of the family. And a lot of cousins in Oklahoma and kind of great uncles and things were also members of the Blue Lodge for sure. And so I went into college and um, had done sports in high school and needed a group of guys to hang out with. So I joined a college fraternity, which is Kappa Alpha Order, and with the ritual for that was written in the 1860s and through the 1900s. And I was drawn to that the first minute that I was exposed to that, August 28th, 1992. And that was really my start on this obsession that I have with fraternity ritual, I would say. And started there. That particular ritualistic system is based on Knights Templar. So whenever I decided to become a Freemason with the help of some of my college fraternity alumni connections who were also Freemasons, I approached them like you're supposed to, and to ask one, be one, to be one, ask one. And so
I was gonna say you got it backwards there.
yeah. I corrected. I caught it. Um, and they kind of said this is going to happen, and then if you get past this point, this will happen. And I put all those things together. And about it was 25 years ago, like this month, I turned in my paperwork to my Blue Lodge in Arlington, Texas, and right where I live, and have been a member there ever since. In Texas, we have a proficiency system that is all verbal. It is you have to learn the answers to kind of catechism style questions, and sometimes they're very short, and sometimes they're a couple of paragraphs, and sometimes they're pretty lengthy obligations with multiple paragraphs. So there was a lot of going and sitting with, which was good for me because I'm at college, I'm a young father, I don't have a lot of, I'm outside of my hometown, and I'm in this very large suburban area early on in my 20s, and it really helped me connect to a set of men, and that's what I was looking for always in all of this, and also kind of honoring my papa, honoring my uncle, honoring my family, and those type of things. So went through, did the 3 degrees, and by November 1999, I was raised Master Mason and joined the York Rite.
Sorry,
Go ahead. Sorry.
when did you, so during um, your first, I guess, your first 3 steps in Masonry, right? When you, upon your, or even beforehand, at what point did you learn that there was well, first that there were such a thing as Masonic rites, and then the differences and the types of rites in Scottish Rite and York Rite? And did you know about those as soon as you put in your application? Did you learn about them after your first degree? Second, like at what point were you aware that there was such a thing as a Masonic Rite in the process?
Yeah. Well, by that time we had, I mean, we had the internet and we had Masonic websites, and you could get that kind of information pretty easily. So in some of those searches and back then called internet surfing, spent hours doing that. But also, as you walk into the front foyer of my lodge, Masonic Temple, there's glass, and on the glass are actually the different stickers of the logos um, for each one of the groups. So I walked past, and as I recognized the square and the compass and the G, underneath it is a red triangle with 3 T's put together. There's a purple triangle with the trowel and the sword. There's a command. There's uh, a cross and a crown, and all these things were there. And obviously, as I was going in to study all those times that I was talking about, from August of 1999 through December of 1999, I saw those things. And so as I kept going through that, working kind of with the Secretary of the Lodge, who became not only my mentor, became my Masonic father. Kind of, even though my dad was still around at that time, he really was someone that I would say shaped who I am, just like my papa did, that I've been talking about. And so Bob was the Grand Treasurer of the Grand Commandery of Texas at the time, and had already kind of been talking to me about, our Blue Lodge line of officers is pretty set, and it's going to be set for a while. If you want to be involved, I'll do what I can to suggest that you get into the active, progressive line in the York Rite, which is in the same building. We have two lodge rooms, and our West Lodge room is all of our York Rite. a pendant body. That's where I was exposed to it, and it was just easy. I mean, I had Blue Lodge on Tuesday night, York Rite on Monday nights, and I was pretty much focused on that and was enjoying it thoroughly because when I was in college, in my college fraternity, I was a part of the degree team twice a year, and just totally fell in love with it. Became a passion of mine, like I said, addiction almost. So it still is.
Right. So I think that that's kind of an interesting place to jump off of, right? Because one thing that is discussed a lot, even when I joined in 2007, became a Master Mason in 2008, was the appropriate time for a Mason to apply to a rite. Um, how many rights to apply to. Even in my jurisdiction, there's been, or district, or pick your term, there's been debates around even whether or not it's appropriate for a rite to approach a newly raised Master Mason. And I have seen in some instances a new Master Mason join Scottish Rite, join York Rite, go through those and become very burnt out very quickly, especially if he has a family. I personally waited. I made a kind of a deal with myself. I wouldn't join a rite until I was out of the East for the first time out of the East for the first time. But other people I know have joined a rite or both rites as soon as they could and have found a great deal of enjoyment out of it. So I don't know if there's a particular rite approach, but just on that topic in general, kind of, do you have an opinion on what is the right time for a Mason to consider joining the rites? Do you think it is
I
personal
would say,
or?
yeah, yeah. I think I would say don't legislate one size fits all. Would be what I would say. I think it needs to be left up to the individual. It needs to be left up to their personal needs. It should be God, family, work, a lot of other things before Freemasonry, and those things should be put in the right place. And so if you're joining too many things, and at times I want to get I love what I do and what I'm involved with and what I'm a member of, and sometimes those are bringing the newer members into that is always a tricky thing, and it's always an individual thing. It's always a conversation of, this is something that if you're interested in, I can help you attain. If it's not the right time in your life, this is not gonna, kind of be like a Mission Impossible. This message is gonna self-destruct in a minute or something, or 30 seconds. This is here as long as we have this conversation, and you're always open to come back and choose to do this and move forward. And if you don't, we'll still be as close as we are. This is not where, I'm gonna judge you in some way. And I think that's overall, I think that's what you're kind of talking about, is all these different groups and parts and everything. And I actually said this, I think, to someone yesterday at the Blue Lodge installation that I was attending. And I said, I would just promote, if I want to be involved in these different things, and I've only got so much time and so many resources of money, and if I don't really have a passion or um, see a current kind of want or need to be a member of one of the Masonic groups, it doesn't mean that I don't think it's great or wonderful or anything. It's just not my cup of tea or things like that. And I've, in 25 years, gone into several different groups, and it seems like there's sometimes some stereotypical conversations that when they ask you, are you a member of a group that they're a member of that I'm not currently a member of, and I have never petitioned or anything, they're just like, oh, that's the end of the world. How can you even be Freemason without being a blah 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 too? And so I think there's multiple things there, and I think you do yourself a disservice as a passionate member of whatever group it is in Freemasonry. Once you're a Master Mason, you can join those groups. I think you do a really disservice to yourself and the group by taking that approach and not being more like, hey, if you would like to connect in and be an active part of this, we'd love to have you. And hey, I respect your opinion, and that tolerance that we should have to each other's Freemasons in so many subjects. But this kind of one, you've hit kind of one of my pet peeves. So on that, and I think it's just really dependent on the individual. And I have people come to me and say, well, a guy shouldn't join anything until he does this. Well, could have been 7 years before I joined the York Rite, and I was already past everything by the time I was 7 years Mason in invitational bodies by that time. So it was just who I was around, the situation that I was at, and what I had access to was a part of it. And for me, having a full, what I would call a full set of York Rite bodies, the chapter, the council, and the commandery, and I could walk in the same foyer in the same front door of a building, and it's an equal distance walk from one end, almost to both rooms, and to access both of them was really a benefit for me, because I was in all four lines, the Blue Lodge, chapter, and the council, and the commandery, all at the same time from pretty much 2000 through 2007.
When did your interest in the kind of the scholarship start, and what would you say kind of encourage that, right? Because and this has come up a lot in my podcast and different guests in terms of learning about Freemasonry. There is the actual gist. I don't want to say the word gist. There's the actual officer proficiency and what it means to be an officer, and to know the words, and to know the work, and to know the floor work, how to move around, all of that type of very valuable procedures that you have to learn. And then there's the scholarship of the history of the body and the more quote unquote esoteric elements to it, or just understanding understanding that scholarship of it, right? And what it is. And again, speaking to you, doing some research, getting contacted through brother Khadim Lo, it seems like you took an interest not only in proficiency as an officer, but in the actual scholarship and the history of it and things of that nature. So what would you say spurred that interest, and when did you start researching more of the history of the York Rite?
Yeah, well, I don't know if I've researched the history of the York Rite. I think my unique skills and passion and just kind of God-given gifts are to interpret symbolism, especially in the last 15 years plus or so. In the beginning, I think I was kind of, because who I was influenced by, we have a pretty decent sized library within our Masonic Temple in Arlington, Texas, and had some affiliated past masters that had been stationed over in, they were still essentially European or English and actually it's the American. Have you ever heard of the American Canadian, like the German Grand Lodge? That's a lot of the military that was stationed in West Germany. and they had their own Grand Lodge, English speaking Grand Lodge. And so there was this whole bigger world out there, Jeff, very early on with Tom Spence, Colonel Tom Spencer, who influenced me a lot in that and was pushing me to do that. And he was saying, well, you're learning all these things, and you're learning these answers to say them precisely correctly, or you're learning how to do a degree in this text styled ritual, but do you know what it means? And so there were those positive challenges there. And so I would turn and I would go to the Texas guys that were around me and ask them kind of those curiosity questions. And they may give me something flat out of like a lecture, or, out of a working tool or something, but not anything that they had ever really kind of sought after themselves and owned themselves. And so I kind of was like, well, I got to know this. I got to understand why. Like, I don't even understand where this name is at, or what this term is, or whatever. Some of it's kind of the secret work or whatever within a ritual, but those spurred me to go learn those things. And then I just decided one day that I was going to write an essay, probably around 2003, 2004. And I wrote an essay, and it got published in the Knights Templar magazine around that time. And that was kind of, people saw that in there. And there's a guy who just recently passed away, but he was going up through the grand ranks of the Royal Arch chapter in Texas. And he came to me a couple of years out before his turn and his reign, and asked me if I would do a series of short talks to help educate the companions within every local chapter in Texas. And I said yes. And so I was like very excited about that. That was Clarence Joy Laney gave me that opportunity. And many times over the years, I would go up to him and I say, "Hey, I'm getting to do this," or things like this podcast, and I would tell him, and I would just like, "Hey, thanks for seeing something in me and giving me that opportunity to have a bigger influence on things." So that's kind of what I've done within our grand chapter and our grand council in Texas. And in the last 5, 6 years or so, because of my travels for work and some of those things, I've been able to kind of have Masonic interactions with different York Rite members in different states in the U.S. And I'm now actually kind of the point where I'm getting to do Zoom meetings with the Massachusetts chapter research, maybe getting to do an opportunity to do some series for a chapter council commandery in Indiana. I've done things for Michigan. I've done, so it's getting fun. It's really fun to do this kind of things, and fun to learn that their ritual not like ours. I've seen some of it in person, not like ours, especially the chapter and the council. But that's the whole. I think that's something we want to talk about in another segment. So I won't get to that too early. So.
Well, I mean, I think now works well for that, right? We
Okay.
talked,
Yeah.
or we were messaging each other before we came on camera, right? And you mentioned in, I guess, your most recent message to me, right, that you've thought a lot about the contrasts and insights, right, into the essence of each degree system. Obviously, we're discussing the degree system of the York Rite, its structures, its essences, right, the kind of the thematic lessons that they are designed to convey to the
The
candidates, I
candidate.
suppose.
Yeah. The
Yeah,
candidate, the
to be
member.
second.
Yeah. Yeah. Like it's kind of like, what is this all about? And I think in a holistic view, that if you go and you look at even down to the mind, and I get down when I unlock something, unpack, interpret, I look to getting down to like the very elemental essence, you know, short of the atomic level, but like what's really going on even at the basics of the basics. And in our catechism, kind of going back to our EA catechism, I never lose that, even if I'm talking about something that would be described as a pendant body, or I think sometimes falsely talked about as higher degrees. They're just subsequential degrees, ones that you've taken after you've learned this bit of knowledge. But even looking at it, if you really look at it, or in the Texas version of things, you don't really have triangles and circles in the actual shapes that are presented, used, and worked in the symbolism and the esotericism of our Blue Lodge system in the first 3 degrees. It's straight lines, it's right angles, it's perpendiculars, horizontals, and those things are all of a terrestrial nature. Those things are all looking at creation, creatures, human beings, and focus there. Where I feel like my studies in the Royal Arch system, especially along with Cryptic, the Council, the Royal and Select Masters Council, and the Knights Templar Commandery, is that they more point to the Creator and your relationship with that Creator, because you're more drawn into everything's a triangle in the chapter and the council. In our system in Texas, our Royal Arch triangle, the point goes upwards. That's an allusion to an ascension, heavenward, celestial, cosmic, something bigger outside of yourself. And then our cryptic council is an inverted triangle, and that's going back to kind of looking within yourself and deepening, and a little bit of a different kind of direction in the symbolism there. And if you put both of those together, you would get what most people would commonly say is the Star of David or the Seal of Solomon. And so what you see a lot in outside of the US or outside of the Blue Lodge, you don't see that star, that 6-pointed star, used in Texas. Obviously, we use the 5-pointed star, which I think you would have an explanation of how you would see that symbolically. And so I really see that, and I went and I listened to the charges. I went and listened, as I do attend Blue Lodge. It's kind of a joke between Khadim and myself in the last few years. At one point he was just like, "Do you ever go to a Blue Lodge?" I'm like, "Yes." So a lot of times I'll go on Facebook and tag him and go, "Hey, look, I'm actually at a Blue Lodge tonight meeting." And I've gone, and a lot of times I'm not needed to be a part of the ritual, the degree team and the conferral, and I'll just sit on the sidelines and listen. And to me, that's some of the most valuable time to really learn. And so I just kept hearing, "Be a better man, align yourself better in the Blue Lodge work." And then I kind of got the same opportunity because we do a really good high volume of work in our chapter and council, especially in kind of the Fort Worth, Arlington, Tarrant County area, and even in Dallas. And I travel around the state also and see those degrees put on, and again and again and again. And was sitting there so many times and just kind of came back to, this is saying, look, not only look towards God like the Blue Lodge says, but it's like, here's how you can connect with God. Here's how you can interact with God. Here's how you and your Creator can be more aligned. And for me, that really is aligned with a lot of other beliefs and lessons and things that I've been taught in my life. So it was in that and we're always going to interpret symbolism from our own point of view and background. And that's why I love to get with others and talk about symbolism in a really kind of unscripted way, to where they bring things out that I'm just not them. I've never studied. I don't have the same background as far as professionally or education wise. And they'll teach me things in a heartbeat, and I love it. And I'll see things that I would have never seen on my own or reading or anything. It's crazy.
You speaking of pet peeves, you touched one of my pet peeves there for a second.
Oh,
But I liked what you said afterwards. You know, the idea, and I've heard this before, right? Of being needed or not needed in a lodge, right? If somebody is not an officer or doesn't have a part in a degree, they can sometimes feel as though, well, they're not needed in lodge, right? And I do like what you had said about, well, first, the opportunity to just go and listen to a degree and really pay attention to it, right? When you have a part, it can be really easy to be so focused on your part and you're kind of going over it in your head while you're waiting to perform it. And then you perform it. And then afterwards, you're so relieved that you've done it and you've done it well. It can be really hard to pay attention and actually listen to the ritual being done. And so, just even if you're quote unquote not needed to be there, it can be so valuable to attend for yourself. But I also always remind guys, like, you're, and I've had this conversation with a lot of Masons throughout the years myself, to guys, right? Never underestimate your value, or never underestimate the value of your presence in lodge, even if you have nothing to do, even if you're bored sitting in lodge because you've heard a first degree 30 times and you don't want to hear it the 31st time, or the second or third degree, or pick your degrees, because it might be the 30th time you've sat through a first degree, but it's the first time for that candidate. And when he looks around that lodge room, he's going to remember whether it was full or whether it was empty. And he's going to remember the people who were there. And in some ways, he may even remember, especially as his Masonic career goes on, at the start, you probably remember who did the work and the voices and the people and, the faces of the people who are doing work. But as you move on, you're going to not just remember them, you're going to remember the people who chose to be present just to be there to support you. So, you know, I've always taken the view, and I've always told this to guys, right? You're always needed, whether you have work to do or not to do. Don't underestimate the value of your presence in lodge and just being there. And even if you're not paying attention at all and you're off in space for the degree, right? That candidate will remember that you took the time to be there, and he's going to appreciate it. He's going to appreciate then, and he's going to appreciate it later. So I think it's really valuable to be present. The lodge needs you whether you're doing work or not. That's always been my philosophy.
yeah. I was actually thinking about kind of what you're saying here the other day, and I think maybe Khadim and I or someone else, we were in. I have a book concept that I'm working on, and I'm trying. A part of it is it's about interpreting um, symbolism, and I'm trying to give people practical ways. In it's going to be multiple volumes, kind of short reads, um, and one of the things that I said to somebody the other day, and I just thought that it was like, would you? For me, I just did it kind of naturally. Was to take notes. I mean, you can, I think you can be non-distracting, like what you're talking about, sitting on the sidelines. Depends on kind of the setting, right, and how the proximity, how close you are to the action, and how dark the room is. There's some factors there, right? But you pull up your phone, and if you think of something, you can put it in your. I have an iPhone, so I have that. I have the notes, and I sit there and jot down a note, and just to remind me of. And a lot of times, I'm doing it because I'm trying to capture the inspiration, and go, okay, is this the starter for possibly putting together an article that could, that I would submit for publishing, or is this going to be, maybe I'm trying to write a Royal Arch study guide, and I'm like, ooh, I want to capture that right here, right now. There, I saw that little, either that interaction in that scene and that part of the ritual, or I heard this phrase and it just stuck, and it just like resonated in my brain for the rest of the day. And there's kind of this contemplation and taking notes. I mean, if you wanted to be the best bachelor's degree recipient, master's degree recipient, PhD, if you were getting certified for something at work, if you were training to be an EMT, how to teach people to hit golf balls, I don't know what it would be, right? You would want to take notes, wouldn't you, Cameron? And I don't understand why we go into the lodge, the windows are no longer around, and we kind of lose the sight of the outside world. We go, okay, well, all these things that we're good at out there, we can't bring them in here because that's not Freemasonry. And and you need to be careful. I wouldn't sit like right on the front row. Maybe sit, where people couldn't see. You wouldn't be distracting them. But you might want to, take notes during the degree just to kind of help spur your memory later on of what it was that you were inspired by or curious about.
Yeah.
Don't
Pen
understand this.
and pencil and a notepad. They cost what, $1.50, at the dollar store, and they're great. They're a great Masonic tool to have. I think. I might write actually. I have the Medium page for Square and Compass, and I might write something down about that myself. When you're talking about what you should have in your Masonic apron case, or especially as you get up in the ranks, right? Some guys have those giant briefcases or suitcases with all of their regalia, and they'll have their dues cards in there, and they'll have their Masonic passport in there, they'll have their jewels in there, right? Make sure to throw in a piece of paper and a pencil in there, because you never know when something's going to happen in lodge, or just any conversation, or you could be walking to lodge and you could hear somebody say something, and that could make you think of something Masonically or whatever it, or yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think a pen or a pencil and a piece of paper is maybe the most underrepresented or underappreciated Masonic tool that somebody can have. It's so valuable, and I try to do it myself. I usually have a piece of paper and or notepad and a pencil on me, and if I think of something, something spurs my mind, I write it down.
Well, I've gone digital years ago, about 2017. Now, probably even before that. I worked at a company almost 10 years ago, and we pretty much were everything had to be uploaded into the database and everything. So I kind of, and I had iPhone and iPad at that time, and have that in my personal life, and so I do everything on notes. I can't live. I don't even know how many folders on notes with different focuses of what I do, and uh, um, anytime I'm sitting still, a lot of times I'm engaging that and pouring as much as I can content into that to capture and maximize my time. So
That
kind of
works too.
going, yeah. So I think we do need to kind of go in, and so the jurisdictional things that I have seen in my travels. I've been 20 years ago, whenever I was a new Mason, I got to go and be in Blue Lodges in the Grand Lodge of Pennsylvania. Later on, a few years later, I changed jobs and I had business trips into Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee. I've sat in lodge in all those. Arkansas, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, um, and Michigan, Wisconsin. Anyway, over the last 20 something years, different jobs I've had, different states, and from pretty much Colorado back to Pennsylvania, I've gotten to sit in a Blue Lodge. And so as I became more, I'll just say invested, time wise and focus into chapter council commandery, and I enjoy Blue Lodge, but in North America, or at least in the U.S., I can't remember which one it is. Preston or Webb or Smith or Webb, or there's some of those guys that would know. There's some people that are a little bit more scholar than me, and they went in and they basically wrote the ritual, and they went to every Grand Lodge and they said, this is how the ritual should sound and look and everything. And so I'll say this, and if I get hate mail, I'll take it because it's just my opinion. Not,
I'll get the hate
not,
mail. You'll be fine.
not the truth. It's not the truth. It's and like you say, there's a disclaimer. This is only one member's opinion, but I see a lot of the similarities in the Blue Lodge work, and I enjoy the Royal Arch chapter, and I can't wait to get up into Windsor and into Ontario because it's different. It's truly different, and the reason is that for the most part, our Blue Lodge Freemasonry in the U.S. and I haven't been to a Canadian Blue Lodge, but I know in the U.S., like I said, these same people kind of in the 1700s, 1800s, kind of homogenizes the way I'll say the ritual, and with Pennsylvania and a few other outliers. But um, in the Royal Arch system, there's three different influences for that. And that's not only England, which is the Blue Lodge influence and where a lot of our actual ritual kind of migrated from, but also Scotland, which there's some influence in the Blue Lodge from the Scottish work, but also Ireland. And so the three of those kind of coming together as you have, the immigrants coming across and bringing that with them, has really, I think, made the chapter work, especially, I would say, one of the most diverse. And so for me, it's always something like, oh, wow, I'm going to go to Wisconsin. And yeah, it's going to be somewhat the same, but there's going to be something there that's like, they're going to ask me, oh, y'all don't do this. And I'm going to be like, oh, y'all don't do that. In those comparative type conversations. So I think that's what I've seen jurisdictionally. There is a general grand chapter and a general grand council that are international bodies based in the U.S. They are not the kind of national governing body for the Grand Royal Arch chapter, the most excellent Grand Royal Arch chapter of Texas, and the most illustrious Grand Council of Royal and Select Masters of Texas. We are our own, and this is going to be kind of a probably not very shocking thing, but just like our Grand Lodge, Blue Lodge jurisdiction, the most worshipful Grand Lodge of Texas, those other two entities are under their authority, but they have their own sovereignty, if you know what I mean. We don't like, so in Commandery, our commanderies, we have a Grand Commandery, but it's a member of the Grand Encampment Knights Templar of the United States of America. And so, and our Scottish Rite Valleys in Texas all are members of the Southern jurisdiction of the ancient 33rd Grand Council of Scottish Rite, ancient accepted. So it really, in my travels, that's kind of one of those things I think we alluded to when we were messaging back and forth. Is that's why if I go out of state and I'm going to be maybe even venturing, let's say I go to Nevada for the first time, I probably would do my best to maybe even schedule my trip when I knew most of the Nevada Royal Arch chapters were going to be meeting, and I probably wouldn't even schedule a Blue Lodge stop on the trip.
Well, and I think that that's actually really fascinating. I mean, I suppose it's fascinating if you're a Mason or you're involved in the rites, because it even caused me to think, and I heard you talking about this on your previous podcast appearance. I've always said, and most of my kind of Masonic mentors or otherwise the people I'm closest to in Freemasonry also always will say visitation and travel is one of the most important things that you can do as a Mason, and it's one of the most valuable things either for your Masonic career or just in terms of getting the most out of the craft and out of your Masonic experience. And by default, I think I almost always think of myself, even though I'm Scottish Rite and proud to be Scottish Rite, I almost always think of that in relation to Craft Lodge or to Blue Lodge. I almost never think of visitation as, visiting another Scottish Rite body or jurisdiction, even though when we say Masonic travel, really we're referring to all the travel, whether it be traveling to a Blue Lodge or traveling to a York Rite, right? And I think I do suspect that that is one area in which a lot of Masons are probably deficient in that they're probably, even if they are traveling, they may not be traveling a lot for the rites. They may be focusing on the Blue Lodge. And I think I really like kind of the way you described it. And I think it's a really valuable thing to keep in mind. If you're traveling and there's no Masonic, there's no craft lodge scheduled, that doesn't mean there's not a Scottish Rite or York Rite event scheduled. Check that out too, especially, don't just focus on, if you're traveling, don't just focus on your craft lodges or your blue lodges. If you're a member of a rite, check those out too. I think that that's a really valuable thing that people forget.
And for me, I mean, 25 years as a Blue Lodge Mason, 24 years as a chapter council commandery Mason. I I did a lot of in the first few years, in the early 2000s, seeking out those Blue Lodges. I wasn't even in the Scottish Rite until 2012, and and so I think it's a phase with that you're in your life and kind of that stage of where you were at. And so for me, it's just in the last 5 years or so when I've gotten the chance to travel again. I really wanted to, and I've been really lucky. I've been not only to local constituent Royal Arch chapters. I attended 3 Grand Royal Arch chapters. Ohio was my first one. It was it still is one of the most amazing experiences. I just think the world of those guys and felt very at home there. They've got a very large, active York Rite group in Ohio, and it felt very much like our grand sessions in Texas. And then I got the chance because I attend Masonic Week, and I met the guy who was about to be the Grand High Priest of Pennsylvania. He said, "Well, why don't you come up
Masonic
and
Week, that's with, sorry, that's with Brother Gomez, right?
well, he is our he's kind of our chief of staff for that. So we have the Grand Council United States of America Allied Masonic Degrees, AMD, as you'll hear it called a lot of times, is in charge of that week. They're the governing body of that, and then they help schedule like the Grand Council for Night Masons, for St. Thomas of Acon, for it starts on Thursday and it doesn't end until Sunday at lunch. And
Yeah, I
it's
had,
literally 12, 14 hours a day of what do you want to show up for and go to. It's crazy. So much fun. If you're members of those, and they're all invitational bodies. There's a few things that if you are a master mason, you can either join or attend. And there are a few people there that are very prominent Masons that are not Royal Arch companions, because a lot of times that's the prerequisite for Knights Templar to join those invitational bodies. Anyway, so but anyway, and then I got to attend recently with Khadim. and some other guys from Texas. Butch Blackman, which is past Grand Commander of Kansas, that lives in Arlington with me, Texas. We were all at the Grand York Rite sessions of Oklahoma, which was a blast in Oklahoma City. I think it was back in April. I lose track of time sometimes, but and I've also gotten to. I just have enjoyed that, and so a lot of times it also kind of feeds off of, once you get to know a certain level of a certain number of people, and you kind of get connected in certain circles or whatever you want to say. Sometimes you get invitations. Hey, we're going to go do this, or hey, I know you'd be interested in coming and joining us in Indiana on this Saturday, or in Chicago for this event, or those type of things. And so, my bucket list is pretty large on Masonic road trip travel, and it's so much, and it just really is special. The Not the things that I've gotten to go do, not to brag about them, not anything like that. It's the people that I got to meet, and it's amazing, Cameron. The more I get an opportunity to travel and to expand, um, just the friends that I haven't met yet. Uh, it keeps me excited to be a Freemason, engaged, and it really makes you. I remember when I first got to a certain level and was on Facebook, and somebody from Colorado would like something, and then I'd come back and I'd look at Facebook, and guys from Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, and all that kind of stuff, and it just, I thought it was really cool. Arkansas, whoever, Kentucky, um, Missouri. So, and it's really fun to kind of meet people through Facebook or online meetings like this or something, and then eventually get to meet them in person. And for me, sometimes I know, especially when I met Jacob Thomas out of Missouri for the first time, it was just like weird that he was like, I can reach out and touch you, man. We've been on 18 months of Zoom meetings, discussing different symbolism and education things, and now we get to do it and just hang out and in the lobby of a hotel. Wow, what a gift that day. So
Yeah, I have had the same experiences with this podcast and with uh, the Zoom meetings, and in Ontario's go-to meetings that took place during the pandemic when we couldn't meet in person. You meet all sorts of brothers that you wouldn't meet otherwise, and then getting to meet them in person when you could travel again, it was a pretty special experience. I've definitely feel the same way, in terms of what that means. I think the word that's come up a few times in this podcast so far, and in your message to me, right, was themes or thematic lessons. Um, Maybe that's a hyphenate, right? But this idea of like the theme, and in terms of travel, right? You talked about kind of traveling and how there are so many unique things within each jurisdiction as it relates to York, right? But overall, do you believe that there's an overall theme to the York Rite? And if so, what do you think that theme might be? Or do you think it's multiple themes and multiple thematic lessons?
yeah, and I kind of went into that a little bit, but I'll go back. Yeah, for me, I really see it as it takes someone out of their craft experience and that entered apprentice, that fellow craft, and it comes back and it revisits, especially the Mark Master degree goes back and it revisits the fellow craft degree. I mean, like it's amazing, the mirror of, okay, well, even down to the working tools. What we talk about, we're talking about those 7 liberal arts and sciences. in education and becoming a better person, right? On the mental side, as a fellowcraft, in that middle, kind of in that thought that the fellowcraft is a man in his young to middle age of his chronology. And so that kind of transfers. Well, this is a fellowcraft and a Mark Master are both kind of shaping things for the first time, and they're getting to where they can do the detailed work, and they can really get down to the precision of things, because you have to learn that first. And it kind of going back to what we were talking about with the ritual, you have to learn the ritual first to be able to interpret it. You have to learn the ritual first to be able to have a commentary or an opinion or see a connection or a dot. You have to know, you have to own it. And so, one of my little hobbies is, I haven't done a lot here, trying to because it's being recorded, but a lot of times I'll throw out little things that are in the ritual, especially if it's a specific thing in a specific, like out of the Mark Master or something, and say that in front of someone, and then catch their reaction, or put that in a message or something. But with the themes, you have the Mark Master dealing with really the day in the life of a fellowcraft. But there's so many spiritual things that are unpacked there too that aren't really gone into in the fellowcraft, because fellowcraft, again, I was kind of speaking about, you're ascending the winding stairway, but you're kind of introduced to geometry, or the letter in our, and in the way our ritual goes, the letter G and things like that. And so it's kind of revisiting that. You're introduced to the keystone, which is the apex of an arch. Still the same kind of concept. There's this ascension in the degree. And I think that's what especially the chapter work, the commandery work is different in the council, but the chapter is always kind of moving you on a journey. It's kind of sending you upward to a place. The whole thing, though, the way the whole chapter council and lodge, the craft side of it, work together in the select master's degree in Texas, and it's also in some of our AMD degree work. There's this concept of the circle of perfection. And a circle, even though it's endless, in our finite minds and in existence, it has to start somewhere and it has to come back to that same point. And so a lot of times, some of my greatest joy at the end of the cryptic council degrees, the Royal and Select Master's degree, Royal Master and the Select Master's degree, is to sit there and ask questions of this guy who's just gone through 9. He's gone through 9 different degrees now. And I ask him questions, and all of a sudden he starts seeing that what he just learned was in his first section of his EA catechism. And now it's just been revealed to him. And that's what these rites do for you. And I think you've experienced that in the 18 degrees that you've taken in your Scottish Rite system, is they reveal back this information that the first time through, if you were told all of it, it would just be information overload. And you do have to learn it in degrees, right? Just kind of like when we're measuring temperature, you're going up incrementally, or you're going down incrementally. And you can't do it all at once. You can't go from 0 to 212 Fahrenheit and it doesn't really work in our physical world. There's got to be some order to it. And that's something in the Scottish Rite that I've seen and learned that is not as much of a theme, is that order in those type of things. And it's actually even in, I can't say I'm not going to attempt to say the Latin, but it's basically from order from chaos, is one of our slogans or our themes in that. But The overall York Rite, the commandery, which is three separate orders within themselves. The first one, the Order of the Red Cross. In some jurisdictions, it's called the Babylonian Cross, the Red Babylonian Cross, things like that. Uh, it has a strong connection to the Royal Arch, the way we do it in the U.S., the way the Royal Arch is portrayed in Scotland and in England and Wales, but not in Ireland. They take a different part of the Bible to study. Then you have the Order of Malta, which teaches a lot about Crusade history, about 500 years of it, the full Crusades and some of those historical events, and has some really cool symbolism attached to St. Paul, the Apostle Paul. And then the Order of the Temple is one of the most awe-inspiring. It's almost undefinable by words to go through that. And a lot of times we seem to, when, especially for me, whenever I'm getting to sit on the sidelines and just help support, because there's a lot of props in that, and a lot of move staging things, like you might be used to in your Scottish Rite stage productions, degree work. And a lot of times I'll sit there, especially during the Easter season, when I'm active and participating at church, and I'm hearing those same things kind of being said again from a slightly different perspective. It really is impactful. And once again, I feel like that's connecting me back to my creator, the great architect of the universe, and a few other terms and labels that he may be called.
I think I like the, and I don't know the Latin off the top of my head either, but I've heard it before, I believe, right? From order to, or sorry, from chaos to order, which is probably one of the
I think it's actually order out of chaos.
order out of chaos. It's right. Yeah, it is one of
I think
those.
that's the, yeah, it's like orbo ad whatever chaos.
It is one of
Yeah.
those kind of, when we talk about themes of Freemasonry, it might be kind of the underpinning of Freemasonry, right? Or if nothing else, it's the underpinning of operative Freemasonry, right? The idea of taking a stone that is, a rough ashlar, right, and making it square. Um, finding 90 degrees, finding all these geometric truths and applying them to the world to create order. And I think that that idea in operative masonry then has made its way into speculative Freemasonry, and even the way that we act, right, in our, the way it's structured, right? We have our 3 degrees, we have from there we go on to the rites potentially. And like you said, right, it's not you join on Monday and you're just given all the information at once. It's an ordered process by which you advance, and there's a proper way to do things, and there's a proper way to walk or wheel and lodge in my case, right? I think really this idea of order out of chaos is something that probably is applicable to Freemasonry in a universal sense, whether it be Blue Lodge or the Rites. In case anybody's curious, I just found it. I'm sure somebody's mentioning it in a comment or something. Ordo ab chaos is what it is.
Thank you for
Translates.
taking one for the team and saying that. Yeah, I'm good sometimes, but I haven't practiced that one as much. So
I'm
my
sure I
Latin's
pronounced it
getting better
terribly.
all the time. Sir?
I'm sure I
Go ahead.
translated it terribly. I guess it translates literally. I just did a Google search
Yeah.
as out of chaos comes order. But I think that's probably, there's definitely an element of Freemasonry that reflects that idea of ordered, ordered liberty, if you want to call it that, or ordered relationships.
Yeah, and that's always on the surface, and kind of the governance of the degree, the governance of the fraternity. Um, I I just like, I've really embraced the uh like I said, the Royal Arch chapter. And if you're wondering what's behind me, this is a depiction of if you were going through the veils, approaching the east in a Royal Arch, a section of the Royal Arch degree. And I love in kind of our sci-fi fantasy things that we have out there. I'm always a sucker for the origin story or the prequel. And the Royal Arch degree takes what we know out of King Solomon's temple and the building of King Solomon's temple that we are kind of thrown into as an apprentice and continuing a fellow craft and related to us, I guess is the way I'll say it, as a master mason in that Hiramic Solomonic type legends. It goes and it says, oh, well, we're going to start you after that time when that temple and that physical building and that system of government for the Israelite people, the Judean kings had been destroyed by the Babylonians. And now the Babylonians have been usurped by the authority. And now the new era, it's like 2 eras of history, or almost 3, passed. And we have this time whenever there is chaos. There is kind of Jerusalem is decimated. And so now we need a hero to come back in, named Zerubbabel, and to come back from Babylon. And you're going from, now think about this, Cameron, you're not going from the west to the east geographically on the map, you're going from the east to the west. So we're always traveling to the east in Freemasonry to go towards light, or any fraternity ritual I've ever been in, the source of knowledge or whatever. Well, you've already attained that over here. You've been in this great empire for 70 years as exiles. Now it's time to go back and implement that, apply that, and regain what was lost, redemption. And those are some of the things that you're not going to find in the Blue Lodge, but you will find definitely in the chapter work. Justice and moderation and grace is found in the council work. And then, because there's not a lot of that in the Blue Lodge work. And then also, you find those themes in, especially in the Order of the Temple, redemption, and even the Order of the Red Cross. Those things are there. And so kind of weaving that part of our conversation back in, for sure. I think that's what I would say there. So,
What I asked this to most of my guests who are, I asked this to most of my guests who are themselves Masons, especially those who have had a significant career and have held leadership positions in either the lodge or in one of the rites or a combination thereof. What advice would you have for it could be a newer Mason, or it could be a Mason who was initiated but was never really active and was away for years and is just now looking at kind of starting or restarting his Masonic journey. What advice would you have for that Mason, either, and it could relate to in terms of joining a rite, and what advice would you give, especially for a Mason looking at joining the York Rite and taking an active role therein, or just in general? What type of advice do you have for like I said, for a Mason, either brand new or looking to restart or re-enter his Masonic career and Masonic journey?
Okay. Which one do you want me to take first? Because you gave me about 4 different options there. So kind of
Let's
help me
go
go
with
back, because I heard all of it, but then I'm like thinking as you're saying the next question, my mind kind of shifted there. So which one would you like for me to address first?
So let's go with a newer Mason looking at a newer Mason starting his Masonic journey. What
What's it
advice
all
would you
about, and where do we go from here? Kind of question, right? Is what you're.
Yeah, what advice would you give him, either in terms of his Masonic journey in general, or if he was asking about joining York Rite.
Yeah, and I've fielded that question, especially in the last 5 years, and for sure a lot. When I do those off times that I do find myself in a Blue Lodge situation. That was sarcasm, Cameron, joke. So I just like ask them what they like about the Freemasonry they've already experienced. What do you enjoy? Do you enjoy putting on ritual? Do you enjoy like what are you really into? And so do you like studying? Do you want to read things? Do you like being an integral part of the fundraising for the scholarships? Or it can be things outside of that. If I know that because there's charities, the way it's kind of structured for us in Texas, we have a Masonic retirement community that's right across the street from my Masonic Temple in Arlington. That's our statewide charity for all Royal Arch Masons in Texas. The council has its thing. The Knights Templar has these things, and if that's what you want to do, those things are there in the York Rite, but they're not as prominent as your local fish fry or spaghetti dinner fundraiser or participating in parades and kind of all those things. So you might be better served by another appendant part of Freemasonry that was more focused on that, if that's what you want. But to answer the question, it's like, why would I want to join the York Rite? Well, I can, and I actually put it together before. There's different. Every degree is going to come back and connect to something you've already experienced, whether it be an entered apprentice or like I was talking about with the Mark Master. And so if you want to just kind of understand things more, and a lot of times for me, I've heard well, if I've asked the question, have you joined a chapter council commander York Rite? And I'm trying to get away from using the York Rite because that kind of throws people off. And then they're with the Knights Templar side of it and kind of the Christian affiliation for that group of Freemasons. It skews the conversation a little bit, but I would just tell them there's these different sets of groups, much like the Scottish Rite, which you're familiar with. You're going to learn something different within each part of it. For us in Texas, the difference is the Grand Lodge of Texas, everything is learned word to mouth or through a cipher book. It's not written down in plain English. In our Blue Lodge work, our chapter council commander, and all of it is written down in plain English. You would just have to maybe learn the short, the passwords, or be taught, reminded or taught again the modes of recognition, signs, do guards, grips. So it's very easy. That's another reason that I went to the York Rite side of things right away, was because I could study at home while I was, rocking my son, who's now 26 years of age, about to be 27 in August, sleep at night. And I could sit there, and, rock him to sleep and study at 11 o'clock at night. And I didn't have to be at the lodge at 7 p.m. on this particular day, during the month. And so it was more scalable for my working young man life. The other thing is I enjoy the props and the costumes and kind of the regalia, and I actually focus on that a lot now, as where I put my effort within a degree team thing. And so for me, I think it's the learning what's actually said in the opening and closing of our lodge. in the Blue Lodge, in all three of our lodges. Knowing what holiness to the Lord and having an arch with a keystone, and all it has is these letters on it, knowing how to interpret all that and knowing all the secrets to that. And so for me, there was just a constant curiosity, and not everybody has that, but there's and sometimes it's like, hey, come do it, try it out. It's not that much more expensive. It's not going to be as expensive as your Blue Lodge. Um, and a lot of times guys will say, okay, I'm ready, or can you help me move forward, and what do we need to do next? Or they're like, hey, I really don't have the time to commit to that, and I wouldn't want to just take the degrees in what we call a festival all at one time, back to back to back, in a Friday, Saturday, or all day Saturday session, and not really get to come back for a number of years. And I'm like, okay, well then, kind of like what I said before, this is open to you, and whenever you're ready, I'd love to discuss it and help you and support you in any way I can going forward. Um, with the Mason, that has been interesting enough. I mean, I'm in a very large Blue Lodge. We have a lot of guys that have just not come for a while, or what have not engaged any kind of Masonic group. And they're like, I used to work nights, or my schedule wasn't right. My family situation was not set up to promote my weekly or monthly involvement. And now those things have changed, and I'm ready to go. How can you get me connected and everything? I had a point in my 25-year journey that around 2008, 2009, my son was born in 1997. He was getting into the junior high years, going into high school, and I wanted to make sure I maximized and showed him that I loved him and that I wanted to be there for him for all those things, and just support him. And I went to everybody that I was involved with, and I stopped taking appointments in leadership positions, or kind of seeking out like maybe different things. And I got it to where I was doing things that were, if I was still active on a certain level, they were kind of behind the scenes, and they were helping out with being on like a community builder award, or doing fundraising, consulting, or helping out with the organization of a golf tournament, or scholarship awards, or things like that I could kind of manage within my own personal schedule. Whenever I was worshipful master uh, of my Blue Lodge, and which we met pretty much on every Tuesday, I had York Rite pretty much on every Monday, and a few Saturdays. I was Cub Master of my son's Cub, uh, uh, Cub, yeah, Cub Scout pack, and we had once a month. I had multiple meetings there for leadership, and so I was a very busy guy back then, but I enjoyed it, and I was one of the best times of my life, and I felt most alive back then. Uh, that was a phase, and glad kind of to have shifted. But I walked away from 2008, 2009 to 2016. My son graduated from high school, and literally that summer, spring, he was kind of winding down, and I made sure I was there for the things I needed to be there for him. But I amped back up and got back involved, and was on degree teams for the first time at that point. Engaged my membership really in the Fort Worth Scottish Rite, and that became just a huge blessing, and so many great people that we all kind of were active at that time, um, being on different degree teams, and getting to dress up as an Egyptian, or wearing different costumes and looking like a musketeer, or whatever. And a lot of the degree teams are the same buddies and that I do stuff with in the York Rite, but we were gonna have fun wherever we're at, but it was just a little bit different doing Scottish Rite, being up on the stage, being a little bit more in costume, and just being a different venue. And so I always am trying to find out, and I think that's what I would tell that Freemason is go find what you're passionate about, whether it's the new guy or the guy that's kind of reconnecting, and go find that, because otherwise you're not going to be engaged, and we have this there's a certain charge in what we call the virtual past master or the past master's degree in Texas. And without giving away any of the secrets, it basically just says, don't ever in future Masonic life take an office that you are not kind of willing and able to give your full attention, passion, and the full kind of your whole heart. Don't because you're doing a disservice to yourself, and you're doing a disservice to the group. So what was the other two questions?
No, that was it. That was the question, right? Is the advice you'd give to a newer Mason or a Mason looking to return, either as it relates to their Masonic journey in general or specifically York Rite. So that was it. Those were the questions, right? So you answered them both. And I always try to get that because I think sometimes all of us, but especially either a newer Mason or a Mason who's been away for a while and wants to come back, they can be nervous about asking for advice. And so if they are nervous about asking for advice, maybe they find this podcast and they don't have to ask for advice. Somebody just gives it to them. Because I think it can be intimidating sometimes for a newer, like I said, either a newer guy or a guy who's been away for a while to approach one of the more senior members and ask for advice. So, which I guess my advice would be don't be nervous. That's what the senior members are there for. Go and talk to them and ask them for advice.
Well, there are a few toxic situations around the world as far as local bodies, and you may go back and not feel welcome. That's okay. That's what those people decided to do. Don't give up though. Go find a place that you're going to be comfortable. You're going to feel welcome. I think somebody told me you got to go find your tribe. You got to go connect with your folks, your people, and don't just go because that's where you have a membership and a current dues card in your pocket. Go if you go back and it's not what you remember it being, or you can't really stand to be in the same room or zip code with the same Freemason that's maybe the leader and kind of calling all the shots. Well, it's time to move on to something else. And I mean, there's multiple even kind of examples in the Bible of you just take those sandals and take that dust once you leave that building and just kind of knock it off and leave it there and go on about your life. And kind of going back to what I said earlier, be happy where you're at, be content with what you're doing, and don't let others tell you you're doing your Freemasonry wrong.
I think that is very good advice. Probably the best advice you gave was right in the middle of that answer, right? Three words: don't give up. I think it's very, very good advice, and it's very easy to, if you have a bad meeting or there's a brother you don't get along with or whatever it is, to have a tendency to give up. And I love the idea of don't give up. Find your tribe. Find something that works for you. So I think that is good advice. And yeah, I think that's a good place to leave it. Like I said, I know very little. York Rite is something which I really only have a cursory knowledge of, either the history of it or the themes of it. So getting the chance to learn from you today, especially on some of those thematic elements of York Rite and what it means to you, and not just to yourself, but the themes that you managed to derive from it. Yeah, I hope other people find the same interest, and potentially it may spur them to either join York Rite or at least pay more attention to the symbols of York Rite and do their own research into the themes and what they take from the degrees and from York Rite. So thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Well, it's been my pleasure. It's obviously something that I've had as part of my life for 24 years. It's become a lot more intense in the last 5 years or so. I really am excited about not only what I'm doing and getting the opportunity to, I don't know if you'd really call it teach or facilitate discussion or lecture or whatever on the actual interpretation of symbolism in the chapter council commandery in the invitational bodies I'm a member of. But what I'm excited about, and once it gets to a certain point, we'll revisit that. But I am working on a book to just teach in general, or to show people how to engage interpretation of symbolism in a certain methodology, in a way that they can practice that. And kind of what you were talking about, they have an intimidation factor to take that away and be like, hey. And I think that in that it's kind of the same thing as interpretation. It has no wrong answer. You know, it's what, if someone says, what do you see in this symbol, interpret it, there's no wrong answer. So you're not trying to hit a target, just let whatever you have flow out of you, kind of thing. I think that's what we've been talking about this whole time, is we enjoy being Freemasons. It's been almost half my life that I've been a Freemason, and so I'm 52, and so there wasn't, it's been since my 20s since I haven't been a Freemason. So there's so many ways that it has enhanced my life, even to where my daughter was able to receive scholarship money from multiple Masonic groups, and it can even be on that side of things. So it's just been a huge part of my life. So thank you for the opportunity.